For the past few lectures, we've been thinking about some of the game-changing things that humans did to become the sole remaining hominins on the human family tree. For example, we've seen how agriculture enabled humans to develop food surpluses and to transition to a sedentary lifestyle, which itself promoted a population explosion. And we've seen how the emergence of cities provided humans with opportunities to make remarkable strides, both culturally and technologically. So today, let's look at how we created numbers and the one thing we probably all like to count the most, money. Now, it may feel as if numbers and money have been rather permanent features of the human experience, but most of the Homo sapiens who have lived on this planet, well, they lived well before us, let alone American Express. And of all the humans who ever lived, most never touched money, not a dime. You know, they say winning a big sum of money can really change a person, but the anthropology of money, that's going to show us how creating money can really change a species. So, as we turn our anthropological lens to money, we'll get a peek at how economic anthropologists apply anthropology to understand how things like exchange, money, and credit transform the human experience, and how our economic behavior may have actually helped us retain our title as the last remaining hominin on the planet. So, let's dig deeper. Let's dig deeper into our humanity. What is this thing that makes the world go round? What is money? To start, try and imagine a time and a place before money. What would it look like? How would you have to change your morning routine? Well, to answer that question, Aristotle, he theorized that the earliest humans didn't even need money because, well, they made everything they needed. But then he did say things changed with farming when new specializations emerged. You see, folks that were great at growing peanuts, for example, they could barter with their surplus to get milk from cattle herders. And it was the famous Scottish philosopher Adam Smith who agreed. In his classic The Wealth of Nations, Smith describes how there was a time before money in which barter was the way people exchanged things. Then, money emerges in order to help make that bartering easier. Since Smith's time, we've continued adapting, making transactions easier by creating credit cards and mortgages. And really, that's the classic story of money. That's what you'll read in most economics textbooks: barter into money, and then credit. Aristotle, Smith, and just about every economist for the past couple centuries, they've relied upon hypothetical history to explain the origins of money. So what possibly can anthropology add to this story? Well, it turns out quite a lot. You see, where Smith and others go to thought experiments to explain the origins of money, we anthropologists, we go to the archaeological and the material record. And the archaeological record, it indicates that we have the history of money all wrong. Our earliest artifacts show us that the idea of credit came well before actual money. And that's the exact opposite of what most of us think. So let's reconstruct this very carefully. Let's see how anthropologists understand the origins and the history of money. But wait, we skipped a beat here. We're jumping right into money, but we haven't even figured out when humans created numbers and counting, right? I mean, that's going to be a precondition for money. I mean, you got to have numbers. So using numbers and money, that's something that certainly makes us unique amongst the primate order, and the animal kingdom as a whole for that matter. Other primates, sure, they can be taught to count and use human numbers, but we humans, we're the only ones with calculators on their smartphones. Let's take a brief moment. Let's think about our human transition into mathematical apes. Generally speaking, there are three phases to the creation of our numbers. First, biological anthropology teaches us about rudimentary number sense, and we'll come right back to that. Then, the second phase is the development of the early number concept, and today, archaeology will help us with that one. Then last, we get to counting with the actual numbers that you and I use every day. So, rudimentary number sense, that's phase one. And it's not exclusive to humans. Other animals display rudimentary number sense too. And, well, we humans, we still have it today. Rudimentary number sense. Now, it doesn't use quantities. This is more about sensing less or more. If anything, it's relative quantities. My favorite example of rudimentary number sense, it's the solitary wasp. One type, the eumenes, it's sexually dimorphic. Females, they're much larger than males. And remarkably, the mother wasp provides her developing larva with food, usually small grubs. Astonishingly, this wasp provides exactly 10 grubs for each female larva. Not sometimes 11, sometimes 9, always 10. And they do the same for male grubs, but with half as many grubs per larva. That wasp, I promise you, it's not counting 1, 2, 3, 4. It just knows 10 and 5. It's kind of like a bird that returns to its nest and sees one of her eggs has been poached. The wasp has rudimentary number sense. The second phase that leads to actual numbers as we understand them today is the early number concept. Think of this as a midpoint between modern numbers and that rudimentary number sense we just talked about. In this phase, we use clever devices and terms to get specific quantities. In South America, for example, we can visit with archaeologists and the living descendants of pioneers in numbers and counting. Have you ever heard of quipus? Well, in the Andes Mountains, proto-accountants named Kamayaks, they used a system of strings and knots to record important numbers like debts or, say, annual harvests. And archaeological iconography, as well as artifacts, they date this system to just under 5,000 years ago. Knotted numbers, but with strings. Once agriculture seeded cities and empires, we see civilizations across the globe creating number systems. From the Maya and Egyptians to Chinese dynasties, and just about everywhere you look, numbers themselves appear to be as invaluable as tools in agriculture in terms of sustaining our species and the emergence of cities and civilizations. Anthropologists, we look at money in a number of ways. We think of money as a vehicle for exchange, as economists do, but we're also interested in deconstructing money, both linguistically and culturally. My friends in Mali, they often joke about the frenetic pace of life in the US, and many people who don't even speak English, they know the phrase, time is money. And you know what, from my Connecticut perspective, time is money, that's not funny. It's not funny at all because it's just a reminder that we gotta keep busy, no wasting time. But for my Malian friends, that's utterly absurd. It's laughable. So the anthropology of money, with our four-field approach, it can reveal some rather surprising facts about the history of money and human exchange. Into the 21st century, there's a unique and enduring trend in the anthropology of money that explores the human relations involved in financial transactions. You see, we're looking more at the collective human experience with money rather than a purely fiscal phenomenon. See, anthropologists were fascinated by the idea that you might sell your house to your child for $1, but you'd never dream of listing it on the market for that gift of a price, right? Actually, you might sell it for $1 if it was a terrible money pit, but if that was the case, I bet you wouldn't sell it at any price to your kid. See, money is money, $1 is $1, but the way we use money, it depends a heck of a lot more on some externally guided market. So let's take this question of the origins of money to anthropologists to see what they add to our understanding of something so central to human lives that we equate it with time. Time is money. So let's get to it. When we want to go to the earliest human societies, we largely depend on archaeology to reconstruct the remains of the day into human stories. And it's a remarkable process. It's a process that has taught us volumes about the origins of many early creations. We've seen archaeology reconstruct the origins of stone tools, for example, so now let's use it to track down the origins of money. Two of the biggest names in the anthropology of money, believe it or not, they're not archaeologists at all, but when they write about the origins of money, they head straight to the archaeological record. David Graeber, in his work Debt, the First 5,000 Years, This is perhaps the most definitive book on debt to date, and it provides an exhaustive history of money and credit since the time of the ancient Sumerians. And similarly, Caroline Humphrey, her extensive body of work on the history and cultural complexities of bartering, well, both of them consult the archaeological record and much more to discover a massive truth that contradicts the barter to money to credit story from economics. Humphrey puts it succinctly, quote, "Barter is at once a cornerstone of modern economic theory and an ancient subject of debate about political justice. In both discourses, barter provides the imagined preconditions for the emergence of money. All available ethnography," she says, "suggests there's never been such a thing." The ethnography she speaks of is the collective work of anthropologists and others who have documented people and cultures across the world. And a primordial barter society, it just isn't in the record. There never was an exclusively barter-based society, or at least not according to the empirical record. And as a matter of fact, everywhere anthropologists have encountered bartering, it's always been in societies that concurrently use money. What is in the record, though, is plenty of coins, precious metals, and, unsurprisingly, credit. In fact, as Graeber notes in Debt, the earliest archaeological evidence of financial transaction doesn't show us the money, it shows us debt, credit. If we go back to the first urban revolution in Mesopotamia, we find some of the absolute oldest financial records ever found. They're the cuneiform tablets that recorded credit. Ancient Mesopotamian leaders, they created what is referred to as money of account. It wasn't a coin or paper IOU kind of money. It was actually much simpler than that. You see, around 5,000 years ago, city dwellers in Mesopotamia had established a fixed exchange rate to settle accrued debts, almost like a universal credit card account for citizens who take silver on credit and then repay the debt with grain. And with a fixed rate set to exchange grains for silver, folks recorded debts on clay tablets, and then at harvest, accounts were settled. This is credit, technically money of account. And it appears to be the earliest recorded financial transaction between humans. And you know what? It happened independently in different sites with different materials. For example, in nearby Egypt, we see a similar history in hieroglyphs. These ancient writings, once translated, affirmed that in Egypt, just like Mesopotamia and elsewhere, credit, or money of account, preceded actual coin and paper currencies by a couple thousand years, depending on the location. And in short, money of account is our archaeologically confirmed origin of money. It's suggested that people in these early agrarian communities probably took seasonal loans in much the same way that many small-scale family farmers in Africa, Asia, and Latin America do to this day. In Mali, the hardworking families that I work with, they use credit at the beginning of the growing season in order to buy inputs like fertilizers and pesticides. And those farm-based lines of credit, they become due at harvest when grains, cotton, or other crops come in. The only difference here is that Mesopotamians, they use barley to settle their debts, and my farming friends, well, they sell their harvest and use good old cash. So, how do we go from this credit/money of account phase and move closer to that $100 bill we love to see in our pockets? Well, the evolution of money unraveled quite differently depending on where you're looking. But regardless, across the human world, as societies grew, thrived, and interacted, precious metals became cross-cultural and timeless mechanisms to facilitate long-distance and local trade. For one, metals were more durable than paper or clay, and the fact that they can be scaled by weight and metal type makes it easier to trade even across regional currencies. For example, a 1-gram silver coin from the Swahili coast could be received as 1 gram of silver just about anywhere there's people who value silver as much as they do back in the Swahili coast. And starting just under 3,000 years ago, we start to see coins and precious metals not as cuneiform symbols or receipts for amounts of grain, but as actual units of value. You see, archaeologists have unearthed coins all across Asia and into the Mediterranean. We can go to China, India, or Turkey to see some of the earliest coins ever discovered. In Turkey, for example, which was once called Lydia, we have coins dating back to around 600 BCE. Now, the Greek historian Herodotus, he advises us that Lydians were intrepid traders who bridged Eastern and Western civilizations. So as such, it's really not a surprise that they were early adopters of coin currency. Coins gave the Lydians a single stable currency that enabled them to transact business across cultures, languages, and geography. We can trace people trading specific weights of gold and silver bars in the names they used to differentiate between various denominations. See, it was across cultural boundaries and geography that early coins were named for their respective weights. The Lydian stater, for example, had 6 denominations: the 3rd, the 6th, the 12th, the 24th, the 48th, and the 96th. The 96th denomination, well, for example, it weighed 1/96th of a full stater. Now, the earliest staters were composed of electrum, which is a naturally occurring alloy of gold and silver. But eventually, Lydians modified their system by introducing pure versions of both gold and silver staters. In this new system, it took 10 silver staters to get 1 gold one. And ultimately, whether as a coin or as a weight, the Lydian stater was worth its weight in gold, literally. Over in India, and around the same time as the stater, there were silver punch-mark coins. And in Zhou Dynasty China, some of the first coins looked a bit more like Monopoly pieces. They were these small little decorative spades. And we can't leave out the knife-shaped coins that we found elsewhere in ancient China. But then across China, around 2,300 years ago, rounded coins emerged as the standard. So far, we've been talking about precious metals and coins. But what about cold, hard cash? Have we found evidence of paper money in the ancient world? Well, by the year 1007 of the current era, the Song dynasty of China was minting over 1 million coins a year. And successful merchants, well, they were burdened by success because they had to haul and store all kinds of coins. And I know, champagne problems, but a problem nonetheless. So, as part of the solution, authorities, they gave exclusive franchises to a few lucky enterprises that became deposit shops. Merchants could deposit money and goods at one of these shops, and they would get a receipt for what they left behind. Now, first, merchants traded these receipts in a proto-cash transaction, and then once the central government claimed full control over the deposit system, China effectively produced the world's first paper currency that was issued and backed by a government treasury. Centuries would need to pass before paper currencies emerged in Europe, and that's exactly why Marco Polo, an anthropologist years before his time, was utterly flabbergasted and inspired by the novel yet well-established paper currency used throughout Kublai Khan's empire in the 13th century. So, with an eye towards advising Europe into modernity, Marco Polo wrote, "It is in the city of Khan Balik that the great Khan possesses his mint. In fact, paper money is made there from the sapwood of the mulberry tree, whose leaves feed the silkworm. The sapwood, between the bark and the heart, is extracted, ground, and then mixed with glue and compressed into sheets similar to cotton paper sheets, but completely black. Wheresoever a person may go throughout great Khan's dominions, he shall find these pieces of paper current, and shall be able to transact all sales and purchases of goods by means of them, just as well as if they were coins of pure gold. And all the while, they're so light that 10 bezants worth does not weigh 1 golden bezant. Any foreign goods to enter his lands were sellable only to Kublai Khan. You received his paper money, and that was good for any item or services you needed, anywhere in the empire. Any payments to Kublai Khan, they had to be made in his specially created paper currency, which you had to get through him. It was brilliant. Polo was astounded by Khan's masterful economic system. So, while coins made it to Europe very early, we don't see paper money until almost the 1700s, and it wasn't immediately embraced. Instead of paper, Europeans stuck with coins, and in the absence of coins, they used alternative devices like the tally stick, and in this, they were not alone. You see, Marco Polo, he also wrote about the use of tally sticks in China, and tally sticks, they were accepted as evidence of economic transactions under the Napoleonic Code. But cutting to the chase, it was in the 1970s that archaeologists found a tally stick in Africa that's over 30,000 years old. It's called the Lubombo bone. It's a baboon leg with 29 notches on it. Now, it'll be impossible to definitively work out what that 30,000-year-old human was counting on that leg bone, but we know exactly how humans used tally sticks in the post-money era. So let's say you live in medieval England, and let's suppose you loan 160 pounds to a merchant. Now, to make sure he pays you back, you take a hazelwood branch and you use it as a tally stick. First, you make several notches on the branch, each notch representing a certain amount. So maybe one notch is the breadth of a thumb, and that represents 100 pounds. And then you have 3 notches, each the breadth of a little finger, and they represent 20 pounds each. Voila, you have a tally stick showing 160 pounds. Now, you split the stick lengthwise through the notches so that both the lender and the borrower can be given half the stick, showing the amount owed. Because every tally stick has a matching set of notches and a unique grain pattern at the split, these 2 pieces of wood, and only these 2 pieces, will match up when the borrower comes to pay you back. Now, that reduces the possibility that either side in this transaction can cheat the other. And here's an interesting side note. Once the tally stick was split lengthwise, the matching halves were broken or cut apart in such a way that one piece was shorter than the other, and the borrower always got the shorter piece. That's where we get the phrase short end of the stick as a metaphor for the bad side of a deal. The longer piece, however, that went to the lender, and it was called the stock, which gives us our modern term, stockholder. So, okay, before we wrap up today, I'd like to take a quick glance at a fascinating phenomenon in the history of money, and that is alternative currencies. Now, we're all familiar with coins and cash, but down through the ages, people have also devised a range of alternative currencies. And in the days before paper money was common, other money types like cowrie shells, clam beads, and leather sheets, they were used to facilitate exchange. Local currencies were part of what led to the success in early American colonies. And you know what? They continue to help communities thrive into the modern era. One of my favorites, that is favorite alternative currencies, it's called the Ithaca Hours, right? So residents of Ithaca, New York, they've been exchanging these Ithaca Hours for decades. There's nearly 1,000 ways residents can spend these Ithaca Hours, and some local employers, they'll actually pay part of their salaries in Ithaca Hours. The system has a proven successful model, and it's inspired over 50 community currencies to adopt it. You might use one Ithaca Hour, for example, to pay someone who washes your car, but then they're going to use that same hour for the meatball sub and iced tea that he gets over there on Main Street for lunch. There's another terrific community currency that's called the Berkshire, and it's from the Berkshire region in Massachusetts. It's kind of like the Ithaca Hour. You see, residents buy 100 Berkshires for $95. Then they spend this money in the community. Recipients, they can use it as full value at other businesses, or they can cash it in at the local bank for a 5% fee. Now, remarkably, some 20,000 residents have purchased millions and millions of these Berkshires only in the first decade, from 2006 to 2016. So, as we wrap up, it's important to note that the history of money includes many different forms of currency. It's not just about coins and cash. And it seems that no single form of currency endures forever. So there are certainly some changes in store for how we use and understand money in the future, right? I mean, from wearable, touchless payment options to phones, ATM cards, and even web payments, our virtual dollars are more virtual than ever. I mean, for years and years now, our paychecks, they've been electronically transferred into our accounts. And that's without a single piece of paper. I mean, we can even pay our Amex bill online with those funds. We're kind of back to the tally stick. Instead of a paper check or an envelope full of cash, we get new e-notches on our e-tally account. But doesn't the money rat race, electronic or otherwise, doesn't it overwhelm us all sometimes? Have you ever pondered the idea of a world without money? Well, ironically, one of the wealthiest empires in the Americas didn't have money. It was the Incas. The Incas, they had a community labor system in which males 15 and older worked for the state. And these workers, they collectively built thousands of miles of roads and palaces. And they did so with amazing block work with precision stone fitting that you can't even stick a knife into. And in return for this fairly demanding group labor, the Incan government provided everything from housing and food to clothing. So without money changing hands and without markets, Incans, they collectively fulfilled their basic needs, and all the while, they piled up hordes and hordes of gold and silver. That said, I bet Incan life was incalculably sweeter for the rulers versus the citizens.